So I'm trying to pick up where I left off, and I've made a whole bunch of notes. I do desperately want to get through with you guys to share a lot of this information on our midpoint update. And I have not reviewed my notes for tonight, so this can be interesting. So I think we were talking about Albert Pike was writing to Mazzini, who is a leader of Italy, about their plans for the for all three world wars. So I've learned since then that both of these guys were members of secret societies. So I'll go over some of the notes with you guys about Albert Pike wrote about the first or the three world wars that they had planned. And like I said, it's a lot harder to find this online than I used to be able to, let's say 10 years ago. And they're trying to say that, this really never happened. It was a fable of a so called letter that was written between the guys because I think it's like really accurate. The internet is weird. Y'all know this. If you've been paying attention the past 15 years, it's done got weirder and weirder. As far as like what you're able to find or not find, what's being censored or not, what's being watched, all this. Albert Pike had a letter to Mazzini. This was 1871, I believe. Okay, this particular account of what happened is that Albert Pike had a vision, and he described the vision in a letter. Of course, a lot of times we hear that these things are visions or dreams or whatnot. Maybe it was. I had never heard it was a vision. I had heard that it was like the plans, and so we wrote the plans down. But with a lot of these guys, a lot of these people that are bringing us our technology, our information. You'll hear all sorts of stories about drugs that were used or rituals in order to bring in information, and I don't recommend that. It may have been something like this because this guy was probably receiving a lot of information all the time, I hate to say. So this outlined a plan for three world wars, and like I said before, it's kind of like they did the first two to do things like set up League of Nations and then the United Nations so that they could form the globalism in the world. I think they did the first two world wars along with a lot of banking maneuvers. That might have been when you saw like one of the first viruses might have also been planned, I hate to say. Hopefully not. So there's really no telling what they accomplished on the first two world wars and around that time with different maneuvers, different plans and moves, and different people. And I believe the reason they've waited till the Third World War is that's the one that needs to be brought in. And if you've noticed, there have been wars all along as far as moving in different kinds of control in different places. But the Third World War needed to accomplish like the things maybe right before the last globalist setup. That may be why we've seen 100 years between them, because it doesn't really talk in these letters about how long it's going to be between each one. Plus, like I said before, the fact that the Second World War easily, sadly, came after the first, whereas the Third World War didn't. It kind of has to be like there was somewhat of a solution or a resolution after the Second World War, and it's taken this long to like build back up, I hate to say, and plan something else terrible. I forget where I found this on the internet, but it does say that this letter is widely quoted and it's the topic of much discussion. There are extractions from the letter, so I guess this isn't even the full letter, but I do find like these same details and different from different sources online. And this is basically what I remember reading years and years ago when I first found it. And it shows that three world wars have been planned for many generations. Like, even if these details are going to change, maybe, or change from person to person, it does seem to lead people to believe that this was a plan from somewhere, that there would not be two world wars, not four, not seven, but three. And so that is like diabolical by itself. So, information about this First World War, it said supposedly what he wrote was it must be brought about in order to permit the Illume, you know what I'm saying there, to overthrow the power of the czars in Russia, which, by the way, guys, these Khazars and these czars and different names that you hear, if you study Nebuchadnezzar's statue down through time, how each kingdom changed, and there's different theories on the two legs. Were the two legs like have something to do with Islam, or the two legs of Nebuchadnezzar's statue have to do with east and west of Rome that fell or collapsed into something else. And so one of the theories there is when you see these names of Czar and Khazars, that's what's left over from the old Caesars of Rome. And so they're shifting that into something else. And my whole theory has been, even before I knew about world wars and what they were planning there, my theory has been there that late 1800s, there were plans in the world brought about by secret groups that followed secret spiritual programs, families, however you want to say it. You guys probably already studied this and you have your own ideas on it. They were following plans that started at that time frame to move the entire world toward the very end times. And they were going to take down the spirituality. They were going to try to take down the spirituality of the truth of the Lord. And they have literally said this, different ones have said this in their writings and in their theories. They had to take down the old paradigm of Jesus Christ and replace it with Spiritism. Once the Spiritism had moved in strong enough, they can replace all of that with an Antichrist, especially with all the traumas and all the difficulties that were going to come into the world. But all of this started at around the same time that they brought mass technology into the world to control everyone to the end time systems. And there was plans for everything, and to move in the new movement of science, the new movement of, that's basically the new religion, and the new spirituality was going to be the science. And so people were going to believe in science, they were going to believe in evolution, that we're evolving as mankind. And there's just a lot that goes with that. That's like a deep occult. I like how Richie from Boston says, sometimes I watch his channel for information, and he says basically the science that we have now is black magic, and that is spot on. He said the science that we practice and learn today is black magic, and especially if you look at what is allowed or not allowed into the school systems. It's like we're just now, for many decades, people have worshipped the school systems and worshipped the technologies. They've worshipped it as in they have believed all the stories and the propaganda and the mind control that this is the latest and greatest. We don't have anything better. This is what we've evolved to. We need to accept this truth over any truth that we're given. And now we're coming to like a revolution in that. It's like a calm revolution of a pushback of evolution ain't quite right. Now, like a lot of people are pointing out, though, they've just shifted that into, well, we didn't quite evolve, just aliens put us here, and that lie. Because the pushback has been so, like, it's been busted everywhere that what they told us about dinosaurs ain't quite right on the timelines, and the geological rock formations don't match, and there's been documentaries and movements about it now, and I recommend Eric Hovind for a lot of creation scientism, Mr. Eric Hovind. There's a lot of good ones out there, though. But now there's been an understanding. We were lied to about a lot of things. And so now, and another thing we've been lied to about is even the physics that we've been taught in our colleges and our school systems, that's the limited form of physics that we're allowed to know about. There's other physics that's hidden, and different aspects of physics that are hidden. So, okay, let's go back to, I'm just setting the stage of where we are in time right now. This, for like when this was planned, a lot of these things were planned late 1800s. If you looked at the ones that were planned, the movements, I think there's a good documentary out that's called Age of Deceit. And the ones that put out that documentary, I forgot, I haven't watched that in a long time. The ones who put out that documentary are, they give you a lot of information of this time frame. So they're talking about, and they're in this time frame where a lot of these things are planned. And so they're talking about, like it says here, there was a dream. There's really no telling how they got this information. If it and it wouldn't surprise me if these details I'm about to read you about the three world wars were never planned by people. This was probably never planned by people. It's too successful. It has been successful, and it was determined to be forced through. This came from like the principality level that you read about in Ephesians chapter 6. That's what we're at war with. So yeah, he probably had a dream or something or a vision and had this information. So It says the First World War must be brought about in order to permit the Illume, you know what, to overthrow the power of the czars in Russia and of making that country a fortress of atheistic communism. And of course, that's not very different than all the world systems that were put in this time. But the atheistic is the important part. Atheistic. And it was no different than feudal lords or anything else as far as the actual mathematical theories of the government system, but the atheism is the most important key there. Because a lot of parts of the world have went socialist and communist since this time. It's been a great experiment since this time on purpose, but the atheism, guys, because if you think about it too, this was still the paradigms of Jesus Christ were everywhere. So the hardcore system they were going to bring in to break the spiritual power of the people was to change it into atheism by force was going to be so-called communism. I think that's what the hammer and sickle was on their flags. It wasn't about the worker that was working so hard. It was that we're going to break this old paradigm. And I mean that was one of the main tools and the main symbols. There were others. So they're focusing on Russia and World War One, and they're saying that they're going to make them a fortress of atheistic communism. The divergences caused by the agentur of the Illume between British and Germanic empires will be used to foment this war. So it looks like they're saying the differences between, and it's interesting that they keep saying the agents of the Illume. That lets you know this conspiracy that everyone's mocked for talking about is real. There are really people that are put into positions to play a role, whether it's going to be power positions. I won't even go into details, guys. Your power positions. People are put into powerful positions in order to play roles or into provoking positions. Think about some things that are provocative in the world. This is why you need to be careful anytime that you're being provoked. These are agents, and they're still working, and guess what? There's probably more of them now than there've ever been. There's a whole lot to this. I hope I get to be able to finish these videos for you guys, but you probably already know anyway if you're watching something like this. Okay, these agents, it's talking about between British and Germanic empires. And I'm not a good enough history buff to be able to sit here and explain to you, oh, it happened right on schedule, just like they said. But I think they're going to get into this next in the reading. It says at the end of this war, communism will be built and used in order to destroy the other governments and in order to weaken the religions. So this was going to be a hammer and sickle for real, and it was going to be used against, it was going to be used militarily and against religions. And if you've studied that, you heard about, it's one of the things that people say, well, you're just upset because it led to poverty or it doesn't quite fit your faith idea. This was violent and killed a lot of people with violence, planned violence, because of their faith systems. And it was in order to move. This was the beginning. I mean, there's always been the ancient hate that's worked in different ways. This was the beginning in moving the entire world toward, because this was used in one area, there was different other methods used in other areas. You can see the corruption that was used in the West. So this was the beginning of experiments that was moving the entire world to accept an Antichrist system, because there needed to be a lot of shifts and a lot of changes. And you know how they always use trauma-based mind control. So this was trauma. This was deliberate traumatic, coming in and overwhelming people, either making them give up or be bitter or not understand. How many times has that happened to you? And whenever we are assaulted in the easier said than done, easier said than understood. When you are violently assaulted, it leaves you with a lot of questions about your faith sometimes. And it's the scripture says that a lot of people, like, the seeds that were planted on the ground, a lot of people, when they had the seeds that were planted in the soil, some of the seeds struggled and had a problem coming up because they were offended by the persecution. The persecution came because of the word, the true faith. The persecution came, and woe to the one by whom offense comes into the world. But the persecution came for the word, and a lot of people could not grow or could not have good roots because of this persecution. So that's a real thing. That's the war. That is a real battlefield and a real war. So that's what you're looking at here. Apparently, that's where they started. It was a plan. I think these are the kind of plans, by the way, that the secret things make. You guys know what I'm talking about. These are the kind of plans that are made, and they are made in cycles. They are made 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3 in this case. And that's what I think they started for the year 2000. Plus, powers to be knew about cataclysm. They probably knew, if you looked at the calendar, I'm not an expert at this. If you guys want to look more into what I'm about to say, look up El Shaddai Ministry with Mark Biltz. They knew about the cataclysm that was coming. They probably knew about the Jubilee of the Earth, the 1,000-year cycles of the Earth. And so you're looking at 6,000 years from creation. They probably knew, they mapped out Genesis and the flood, and Abraham's time, David's time, the life of Jesus. They knew about the time he was crucified, and they knew that we were hitting the year 2000. 2000 was probably like on the map for the marker of go time. So I think they also had plans that you don't find in a letter for 2000, 2010, and 2020. That's what we've been watching. And sometimes I wonder if their plans, if you will, their plans were 2000, 2010, 2020. Those were the plans that were actually used as these cycles of like a white horse cycle. This is where I've looked before and I've said, well, maybe these were not seals opening. Maybe what we've been watching is just some kind of a elaborate plan. But the reason why I will still say it's seals opening, or it's close to it and close to that time and used like it, is because if you followed like the 2000 plans turned into conquering and to conquer, going forth like the spirit of Antichrist with the white horse. The 2010 plan was like the red horse of peace taken from the earth, the red horse of given the sign of the great sword, which could have been like the ISIS movement or ISIL. And then, of course, we have now what looks like the scales movement of moving into the cashless, with not only a collapse of the world economic systems, but also the technology to give you the power for the scales. And so sometimes I think that their plans of 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 were used to be like, okay, and it's used with the Lord, and they can't do things like that without permission anyway. So that kind of maybe exposed seals opening. And one of the reasons, like I've analyzed it and said, well, maybe it's really looking like a foreshadowing of seals, and this is not seals yet, perhaps. And I've gone into many other details in other videos if you guys want to look into that on other videos on my channel. But one of the most convincing things is what's going on with the time clock of Israel, as far as we probably are seeing seals open. And also the weather, like, it's not like we're just having a foreshadowing of it now, and maybe in 100 years the real seals will open, or even in 20 years, because it looks like with the weather the way it is, with the cataclysm coming, or most likely powers of heaven shaking, we don't have time for any more cycles like this. This is the time, and this is what it is. That's what probably most likely. Okay, so that was their description of the First World War. Another thing too, like, are we going to be okay after this World War? Which a lot of people say this one will be the meltdown of the world, and that's where I think that the Antichrist system will come right in to save the day, to save us from ourselves, right? As far as, oh, we're going to cycle out of this like we did of World War II cycle, and we'll have another one 100 years from now. There's too many things that are matching prophecy, end time prophecy, mostly, that cannot keep escalating, or probably cannot revert back into another cycle of more peace for 100 years and then do it again, if you will. The technology is like a tracker on that too. What would we do with 100 more years of technology? Would we be even way more super advanced? And then the weather would calm down and come back? Maybe. not only what are the odds of that, but also, like a lot of people say, that there is a promise when in Matthew 24, when the Lord is explaining, they ask him about the end times before his death. One of the things he goes out of the way kind of to tell them is that whenever you start seeing the beginning of sorrows, when you're seeing the earthquakes escalate, and you're seeing certain things like this, that will be the same generation that witnesses. So a lot of people have tried to. He says that's the same generation that will witness the end of everything too, that will witness it all being accomplished. So a lot of people sit there and they try to map out, well, how long is a generation? Anywhere from 60 to like 120 years. And they try to look at like the beginning of the legal state of Israel. So how long do we have from that? But I think maybe what is the most useful understanding from that is we're not going to have like, since we've been in these earthquake situation until now, looks like a third world war, and the formation of the 10 final kingdoms and everything like this, and the technology for a beast system. That's almost like 2 generations to wait 100 more years to go into another 100 year cycle. That's 2 more generations. So by now, I probably don't even have to be explaining these things of why a lot of people are thinking we're at the last days. And now, recently, sadly, what's happened with the Middle East escalation, I've had a lot of my friends saying we're getting raptured soon. And I've heard people talk about it. I've jokingly said that I'm a founder of a Baptist church called We're Not Getting Raptured Baptist Church. And that's just my joking way of knowing that people see me as not believing in a rapture at all, because I think we're going to go through a few things. But there's more and more people. There's more and more people saying, guys, we're going to go through a few things before this catching away into the clouds with the Lord. And there's a lot of different theories on how it could go. So with recent events, you don't have to really be explaining to people so much anymore about why you stand where you do on raptures or not, or on why you're thinking it's closer to the very last days. But because it keeps escalating, like it's not going back to normal. So a lot of people are looking for it to go back to normal since the virus. I'm like, it's not back to normal since 2008-ish time frame, maybe. So to continue reading here, it says students of history, we're talking about this theory on the First World War, and they were going to use British and Germanic empires to. You have to think of how the world was back then, before this, to change Russia, and they had to get rid of the old paradigms and move in. They're calling atheistic communism. There were several systems moved in at that time. There were probably a dozen, right? And they're all experimental, all different shades. This is what they were planning for Russia and that area, from the old paradigms toward Antichrist. So these systems are actually Antichrist systems, to the point where I've told people for a long time now, we're in an Antichrist system world. That's all we have anymore. Our grandparents, that's pretty much all they knew. That's how long we've been in it. That's how long we've been calling things normal that are not normal. They are complete Antichrist. Lord forgive us, you know? Students of history will recognize that the political alliances of England on one side and Germany on the other, forged between 1871 and 1898 by Bismarck, who was a co conspirator with Pike, they were instrumental in bringing about the First World War. I'm not up to date on that, but I'm taking for what they said. That sounds right. The England versus the Germany. Okay, so here's their plan for the Second World War. The Second World War must be fomented or brought about, stirred up, by taking advantage of the differences between the fascist. Now, this is after the First World War has changed things. The fascist and the political Zionist. This war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed, that the political Zionism be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel in Palestine. During the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough in order to balance Christendom, which would then be restrained and held in check until the time when we would need it for the final social cataclysm. So this happens a lot with politics between nations, is you wonder why secret technology was leaked, why there were traitors who are these same provocateurs and agents leaking technology to other nations. So, one of the theories there is that rivalry is needed to bring about something in the future through wars. So it's not that they're trying to make peace, they actually want the wars. When the peacemaker comes and says, you must surrender everything you have to us and sign away all allegiances, all rights, all faiths, and surrender to the new system, they're going to sell themselves as the final peacemakers. Well, we came back. We tried an experiment here with people on this planet. We came back to make peace, and you guys were all fighting anyway, so we came back for. Plus, I think they're going to throw in there's other things that are coming that are very dangerous to you that we need to protect you from at this time. Not just yourselves, but outside things. So I think they're going to be selling us a lot of things. So get ready for paradigm shifts. So they're going to come save us from all kinds of things, and we need them, right? And what they're not going to tell us is that they're the ones the whole time that was causing all the problems in the first place. And so the notes continue on about the Second World War. After the Second World War, communism was made strong enough to begin taking over weaker governments. In 1945, a Potsdam Conference between Truman, Churchill, and Stalin, a larger portion of Europe was simply handed over to Russia, and on the other side of the world, the aftermath of the war with Japan helped sweep the tide of communism into China. And they're saying too that if you're reading this and you're saying that the terms of Nazism and Zionism were not known until 1871, you should remember that these groups that make these plans, they invent these movements. They're still inventing movements today. They're still inventing keywords and catchphrases and memes, and they've been doing it since before we had the word meme. And they're putting it on mainstream media. I remember it was like 90 something, late 90s. This would be another thing, and I think I'm about to share those notes with y'all too. Early 2000s, another thing that they rolled out was the mass media to hypnotize and trance and trick and control people. 24-hour news cycle, because that was going to be needed to control such a great number of people with the narrative all the time. So yes, they're always coming up with words and verbiage, and they're always coming up with the agendas and these keywords. And I don't know when they knew the word communism, socialism, and capitalism and hypercapitalism. I don't know who invented those words too. Maybe they were here before 1871. But yeah, there's a lot of movements with a lot of verbiage and terminologies that came with it. Late 1800s, I'm saying, and it is the Antichrist movement. That's when it started. That's when the real end time shift started. These other times that you heard happen, like Dark Ages, I know it was the same people behind them with the same agendas. I just haven't studied it, or I have not been given that information. Things were happening then too. And I would be willing to say it was the same people, the same families, the same groups, the same people that would sell out and do the rituals. And it's the same methods that they use to get information on how to. I would say that this goes into the Napoleonic Wars and a lot of things. But I just haven't studied history back that far. The only thing I have noticed from my studies, because it was directly relevant in what I'm supposed to probably share, is the movements that were specifically antichrist. These were all these antichrist movements and plans for the world. So in addition, communism as an ideology and as a coined phrase originates in France during the Revolution in 1785. A lot of illuminated things happened at that time, probably including the idea for America, or that was something that was also planned for the America was named after one of the pagan gods, but we're told it was Amerigo Vespucci, conveniently. So a lot of these names and a lot of the nomenclatures and terminology and plans, this is where it's coming from. It's kind of like you can tell sometimes whenever you see the news or you turn on the news and you hear this brand new thing. We're announcing this to you guys as though we just heard about it too. And we didn't know this was coming at all. And it took everybody by big surprise. And different ones have pointed out that sure enough, It must not have caught them by very much surprise because they suddenly have all the medias have if they would have just learned of certain events organically, it would have taken them a lot longer to get their talking points together and to come on to, of course, we're putting all this trust in them that they are such experts and professionals that they can come up with everything so quickly. But no, a lot of these things are pre planned and planned out perfectly to the letter and then presented as though it's brand new. It just came out of nowhere, including a lot of the current events. So they're talking about the word of the communism was an ideology that was came out of the French Revolution, and it was a phrase that was coined 4 years before the revolution broke out. And from Rousseau, that was another name they're putting in there, and a most famous conspirator, Adam Weishaupt. So that's a name you know if you study these things a lot. Okay, so now we're coming to what they schemed up and dreamed up about the Third World War. Must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the agentur, agents of the illumined ones, between political Zionists and the leaders of the Islamic world. Kind of like what we might be seeing today, I hate to say it. It must be conducted in such a way that the Islam and the Zionism mutually destroy each other. Meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economical exhaustion. This is the plan, and it's trauma-based mind control, so that people will just accept it when the savior comes, the fake savior. Some of this is still mysterious, but I think I have some ideas of what they're talking about. It says, "We shall unleash the nihilist and the atheist." And I think what that is there, I think nihilism is just destructionism. So I think we're starting to see the training groups of that coming out of a lot of the woke and the ISIS and zombies, if you will. The drugs may have a lot to do with this. And also, Russ Dizdar and L.A. Marzulli, different ones, would talk about how there are programs to train people and they don't even know that they're trained. They don't even know they're in the groups, and this is very deep, dark things. And that there are groups and groups like this. There's probably also cells that do know what's going on and they do know they're part of things. So, between all of this, Russ Dizdar had a theory called the Black Awakening that he was told about by the groups when he worked with them, and he has a book on it, that this Black Awakening was like a trigger time would come when everyone would be triggered and released to go and do their mission. A lot of people, that sounds like another dream that Mike from Around the World had, by the way. He had a dream where he saw people that were suddenly triggered at a certain time, and they were like go mode and they were being destructive. It probably has something to do with things we've never seen before, but we've seen hints of it, like ISIS. They just, I call them, wild raging cannibals just being released to, and they're trained, they're programmed, they're demonically inspired. We may start seeing them in the rioting that's coming, probably. But that would be a destructionist, if you want to call a nihilist a destructionist, and the atheist together. Cannibals is what I call it, or zombies. Not like a zombie virus that you've always heard about in the movies, but just like you don't want them at your door. It's like worst case deal, and hard to fight back, hard to overcome maybe. So they're unleashing these things, and they probably have unleashed them when it comes to planning destruction, planning on protests, so called, and the cannibals released, and we haven't seen it yet. We've seen hints of it. Other countries have probably seen it, like a country that's being destabilized for war. That you've seen recently that's been just completely destabilized for war, that's probably where you've seen them unleashed there. That may be part of what's going on in the Pale Horse when that happens. So they're saying they'll be unleashing nihilists and atheists. This is probably something that just comes out of a dark plot, like one of the worst things you can just unleash on people. And we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, origin of savagery, and of the most bloody turmoil. That would be ISIS release, like unleashed in a war zone, in my opinion. Something crazy. Then, everywhere, the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries will exterminate those destroyers of civilization. So, in other words, it's just a clash, it sounds like to me. Citizens, you have to defend yourself. So, they will be disillusioned with Christianity because by then it's just like any other trauma based thing. People coming out of war zones and having to go to, or even uh, weather turmoil zones that are having to go to refugee centers. It's just terrible disillusionment. People that come out of horrible crimes. It can be very disillusioning of like needing to know where to find your faith. Where is God in all of this? Like, why did he even leave me alone? Why did he cause this to happen or make it happen? Is what a lot of people ask. You get disillusioned with Christianity. It's funny they don't say Islam. You don't get disillusioned with Islam, you get disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration. So they're assuming that people have faith because there's random spirits going on. So this is what we need to like be sober minded in prayer about ahead of time. They're just looking to knock people of faith off their feet and anxious and not knowing where to put their worship, it sounds like, in their faith. So then, supposedly, people of faith will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of a pure doctrine of Lucifer, finally brought to public view. So there's going to be a lot of this kind of thing, like we see some of it maybe at CERN. There's going to be a lot of it with the coming system. This manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement, which will follow the destruction. It's not going to be just general reactions. There's going to be some of that, but these things are always taken advantage of with their agendas pushed in. Where people are weak, sick, desperate, and needing something different, they come in and rescue and offer the rescue plan. That's bad. So, which will follow the destruction of Christianity and atheism. So they're wanting their left right paradigm is you've got atheistic communism, you've got Christianity, so they're both going to accept the Antichrist through this. They're both going to be conquered and exterminated at the same time. And this goes into talking about since 9/11, world events in the Middle East. They can see this being fomented already. And this article was written before even the recent things in the Middle East. So back to our notes. This just shows you how they did have 3 world wars planned. I've also found other notes, like in other sources, that some of the wars they were planned with like a communism on one side and your fake anti-communism on the other side, a national socialism. I think these were all just experiments to see like where they could use what version of which the best where with what people groups, and the same with capitalism and corruption and crony capitalism and fascisms and things like that. So it was all experiments, but the biggest thing was to push everyone toward the atheism idea with destruction toward Christianity, subversion toward Christianity. I feel like these are dangerous things to talk about, but that's exactly why I've been attacked. And like the verse says, that the lust of the flesh war against the soul. So they either want to be able to really appeal to and feed lust of the flesh. Like, I think that's like what Hollywood has been used for too. Because Hollywood is made, and that whole idea with the movies and the music and all of it, Nashville, you could say. I was telling somebody the other day that this really appealing country music that was just like give up, everything's hopeless, and go get on some dope and all that, that is sorcery, and that is atheistic communism. That's the root of it. That is it. Is to, instead of having faith and surrender to God, have the opposite. That's why we're supposed to believe in right along with it. Part of it, the atheistic communistic theory, which was very strong in America, was evolution, atheistic evolution, and depending on ourselves, not being dependent, humble, dependent on God, and not having the ways of the Lord, but having lust of the flesh, which wars against the soul, all of it. And so it's very important pillars of the movements at that time, away from faith and toward the Antichrist movements. Some of your systems were meant to just destroy destroy things that worked, destroy lives, destroy functioning, whether you were in a communist country or not. And that way, when people reach out for help and reach out for what they need, they're going to find things like medication, including prescribed medication, and they're going to find pleasing of the flesh, primarily, to war against the soul. All these things with a backdrop of losing light, losing truth. This has been like a movement the whole time. And this is like where the Bible says, "Come out from among them and be separate, so that you will not receive of her plagues," and calls it Babylon. And I don't think, like, I'm not being perfect at it at all, but there's like, I encourage you guys to do that. People have like their different theories on how to do that too, but I think if you're genuinely doing that in your heart, between you and God, it will be rewarded. Like, my version of it is to try to stay away from worldly influences. Try to boycott them. Try to recognize whenever flesh is being pulled on, a weakening there, more so than the things of God. So it's a war. I mean, they say knowing is half the battle. And so you had all the systems being moved in the late 1800s by design. This is kind of a proof of it. That letter is kind of a proof that was at least going on, the think tanks of the day, if you will. I've covered how they deliberately made America more socialist and more categorized, cataloged, and controlled, especially since that World War II time. How England was forced from being a world empire, they were forced into a situation where they could become under or part of a economic uh, European Union, which makes Brexit interesting. The Brexit movement, that makes that interesting, because that was a little bit of a pushback on that experiment. So you can see how the Arab Spring and a lot of the economic springs that came with it. See, this is back to, oh, these words did not exist before they when they wrote this letter. It's because they coined the terms. They're the ones, these provocateurs, these agentors, coined the terms as well. Like, what would they call that? Neuro linguistic programming, mind controls.